Well, hi everyone, and welcome to Ask and Wonder. This is the show that brings Christians and skeptics together to talk about the big questions in life. I'm very excited about this conversation, and you might be wondering, Pedro, you are always excited about every conversation, but that is exactly the way it happens. I just love having conversations with people, and today we're going to talk about a topic that is very close to my heart. The topic is atheism a worldview? I was an atheist in the past. I'm a follower of Christ. I'm a Christian today. And sometimes I wonder, up to what extent atheism can be called a worldview and what calling atheism a worldview entails. And I'm very excited because for this conversation, we have here Christian apologist, theologian, and college professor at Welsh, Christopher Talbot. How are you?
I'm doing well, doing well. Thank you so much for having me on here.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited to have you here. So before we jump into the conversation, Chris, and ask you questions about this topic, just would like to remind our viewers of ways you guys can connect with the show. You can email me at askamwondernashville@gmail.com. I'm actually very excited to get back to live events. I think COVID-19 is going to stay with us at least till the end of this year. So next year, of course, I will continue with our online interviews, but I'm excited to start doing some live shows and bring people together. And also know that this is an online show now on YouTube, but you can also listen to this on a podcast version. And you can look up Ask and Wonder on iTunes and Google Play as well. If you guys have any questions, again, you just contact me at askamwondernashville@gmail.com. So yeah, thank you, Chris, again, for being here. And let's start with a question that I always ask everyone that is in the show. Chris, have you always been a Christian?
I've not. I would say I became a Christian probably about when I was 13 or 14 years of age. My parents, I would say that they're Christians now, but largely when I was growing up, it was us kind of jumping from church to church, and we might attend one week and not go for a few weeks or something like that. So there was maybe a nominal Christianity in my household, but it wasn't until I was, in about middle school and really going into high school that I started taking my faith seriously and really considered myself a Christian.
Okay. And then when you started taking Christianity more seriously, would you tell us a little bit about that process and the things that you did?
Sure. Yeah, so I grew up in Michigan, Southeast Michigan, a little town called Tecumseh, and I could probably count on one hand out of my high school of maybe 1,000 students or so of the people that I considered or that we interacted with like serious Christian faith. There's quite a few that attended church and I think would consider themselves Christians, but ones that really felt serious about their faith and wanted to dive deeper into it. And so I just found myself really pretty early on wanting to know more about this faith that I'm now defining my life by. It's something that I think is a whole life view that I'm going to subscribe to. And so if that's the case, and I think I realized that pretty early on that meant that I had to figure things out. And so I had to figure out why I believed what I believed and what was important, and really test those things and see whether or not it was worth holding. And if it wasn't, I was willing to give up on it, but I wanted to test it. And so I think even from an early age, as I would interact with other people in my church and people outside of my church, I just started doing a lot of reading, a lot of apologetics. Remember as like a 16-year-old, I was bringing home these like 400-page books and just just paging through them real quick and trying to eat up as much as I could. So I think for me, taking it more seriously was really just trying to see whether or not it held up to the critiques and to the objections that people had of Christianity.
And as a college professor, would you tell us a little bit about what you do at Welsh?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm in charge of our youth and family ministry program at Welsh College. So I mainly train and teach classes in youth ministry and family ministry. So we cover everything from education in the church to children's ministry and philosophy of youth ministry, things like that. I also teach classes in biblical and theological studies as well. So I get to do a little bit of that as well. And I get to teach my favorite class, which is Introduction to Apologetics. So we get to have a lot of fun in there.
That's good. Well, thank you for sharing, Chris. Okay, well then, Chris, let's just jump into the conversation about today's question. Is atheism a worldview? I'll give you just a few my perspective about the question and the reason why I chose this, and then definitely would like to hear your thoughts about this. I was an atheist in the past, meaning I didn't believe in God. And of course, in terms of definitions, atheism is just, nowadays it's just defined as a lack of belief in God or gods. We can go with that one. It is okay, though I have noticed two things about this conversation when I have conversations with my atheist friends. The first thing that I've noticed is when a person says, yes, I have a lack of belief in God or gods. I've noticed that there's also sometimes a presupposition, which is there is a lack of belief, so I don't know, which actually sounds more like agnosticism. But then I've noticed that there is a presupposition there, which is actually, but I would rather prefer to live in a world in which God doesn't exist.
Sure.
So that is a huge presupposition when it comes to atheism. And then when it comes, another thing that I've noticed is atheism a worldview? So I've noticed by definition, I think it is not. But then not believing in God leads people to actually live in certain ways, because atheism or Christianity are not just philosophies that are just floating around as ideas, but they have to be instantiated. They're real in the world. So atheists end up acting in the world in certain ways. So perhaps it could lead to a worldview sometimes. So that is just so interesting. And I went through this process myself. And since you love talking about worldview, I would like to talk to you about this. So my first question for you, Chris, what do you think about the topic in general before we go deep into specifics?
Yeah, I think it's a really fascinating topic. It's interesting. And I think I largely agree with you on a lot of these, on a lot of those points, as far as, and I'm sure we'll get into more of that here in a little bit. It's interesting that the term worldview, and I know we'll kind of talk a little bit more about this, but the term worldview can mean a whole lot of different things, and people use it to mean a lot of different things. And so I think that causes some difficulty. And maybe in a lot of ways, Christians really have taken ownership of that word to really talk about like their own worldview. What does it mean to do like worldview study and things like that? But it's used outside of Christianity as well. So I find the whole thing fascinating. I think it's interesting to me, from my perspective, of seeing how different facets of life interact with each other and seeing whether or not that's cohesive, right? So if, I might have like metaphysical assumptions, and I have ethical assumptions, and I have, epistemological assumptions. That's okay for me to like believe those different things, but do those work together, right? Do they walk in balance or in tandem with one another? Or am I kind of holding these apart from each other, compartmentalizing them, and just trying to kind of live on with my life? And I think that's an interesting thing to examine.
So let me ask you a question, Chris, about worldview. You kind of said a little bit about this already, but with the metaphysical assumptions and then the ethical and epistemological assumptions. But what is the limit of a worldview? How much can we put inside of a worldview in order to make sense of reality? Is there any limits to that?
Sure. And I suppose
I made a mistake in my English. Are there any limits?
Yeah, no, I suppose it depends on who you ask. Some people really want to hold a very tight view on this. And so if you do like one thing outside of your worldview, you're inconsistent and your worldview falls apart. And I don't know that that's entirely fair. Although I would maybe ask what leads us to be inconsistent with our worldview, and does our worldview have an answer for that, right? And I think maybe Christianity does. But yeah, I think to me, you include just about everything in there. You might put those under broad categories like what we just talked about, but I think it includes, maybe on like a secondary scale, things like views on politics, education, family life, things like that. So where I might say like my broader worldview is included in these assumptions of like metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, ontology, things like that. That then means that there are things that I should believe because of my worldview in like practical living. So things in like family living, my work, my child rearing, things like that.
I see. Then when talking about the atheism as a worldview, if this were true, Chris, what are we truly saying? Or when someone says, actually, yeah, atheism is a worldview, what is this person actually saying? Whether we agree with it or not at this point, if we were to say atheism is a worldview, what does that entail?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I would say at the very least, it entails a certain way of living, right?
Okay.
And so it might assume things about the way in which it might assume things about my origins. And certainly I think atheists are generally consistent on this about having like a naturalistic beginning of the world, something like the Big Bang. And there might be some differences of opinion there, but they're largely in agreement there. But it also includes things like meaning, right? Like, is there meaning? Is there purpose? Is there a telos, or like an end purpose to the world? Is there morality? And so giving answers to kind of those foundational questions. Another important one is my own identity. Like, who am I? What am I? And why is that important, or is it not?
Yeah, you mentioned there something interesting with the topic of the Big Bang. I'm doing a lot of research. I do believe that I'm not a scientist, but I do believe the Big Bang happened. But it is very interesting how when supposedly science is telling us, describing something that happened, let's put it in this way, it happens. It's being described. There's a point in which belief and worldview it starts interacting with this description in order to be part of a bigger puzzle. Because, for example, for me it's just very interesting the situation with the Big Bang. For example, I believed it happened because of the evidence, and atheist friends also believed it happened. But then it's interesting because beyond the Big Bang itself, then we actually put it inside of a worldview that is established before actually approaching to the Big Bang, which is, I do believe in a mind that it's beyond space and time and created everything, that is God. So the fact that it started out of nothing, it is incredible. And then the atheist side go, oh yeah, this is actually evidence that everything happens in a naturalistic way. And it is just so interesting how everything kind of ends up being part of a bigger puzzle with which we approach topics. And this is the question I would like to ask you now, Chris. When, in your experience, when a person says, I'm an atheist, what do you hear there besides the facts that, yeah, this person doesn't believe in God or gods, but what do you hear? Are there any expectations concerning atheism, concerning the way they live their lives or not?
Yeah. I think it's natural to have certain like preconceived notions, and certainly if someone comes to me and they're an atheist and I say the word Christian, they have preconceived notions about like what I believe, whether or not those are true or not. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think, for good or for ill, I tend to think of someone that places a pretty heavy emphasis on science, maybe even scientism. Puts a big emphasis on skepticism. I think of like David Hume there. Puts a big emphasis on like naturalism and things like that. Now, if I'm interacting with an individual, I want to clarify, what exactly do they mean? Because I think you were touching on that often becomes the issue is, we have a preconceived notion, and when we mention a worldview, and I suppose this is kind of the underbelly of like talking about worldviews, is when we mention a worldview, we might have a whole lot of assumptions about what that means, and they have a whole lot of assumptions about what it means to them. And so trying to figure out terminology and what our actual presuppositions are is about half the battle.
Mm-hmm. When talking about worldviews, Chris, what do you think about conversations that lead to adjectives like better or worse? When it comes to worldviews, how can we do that?
Yeah. Well, no, I was just going to say, if you're going to do that, if you're going to have like value statements, you have to have some type of like moral framework to be able to mention that. I think that's one of the issues with something like a view on scientism, where you're trying to make these value judgments about the world or what's better for people. But what scientism really does, which is founded, is kind of an overemphasis on science, is really just a descriptive procedure, right? It's simply saying like what is, not what ought to be. And so I think depending on the worldview, we're mainly talking about Christianity and atheism here. Depending on the worldview, you kind of have to ask the question of whether or not it even has the internal framework to be able to make those value judgments. Can it say things like better or best, or is it simply just kind of explain what is and not make any statement about what ought to be?
Yeah. Why do you think that is, Chris? I notice science is a topic that I really like. In terms of description, I don't know much about this. I love learning about this, but I like kind of the philosophical aspects of it, Like, for example, when we discover something, we are just knowing things at the descriptive level, but we actually don't know what things are at the objective level. We know what energy is only because we know how to describe it and what it does, but objectively, we just don't know what that is. But why do you think our atheist friends think is not, sometimes it seems it's not, it doesn't take us anywhere to talk about the ought to be? Why is it not that part, of the conversation?
Yeah. Are you saying why do they not include it?
Yeah, meaning what I mean is that for them is just, this is what it is, and I don't actually, of course, this is a generalization. There are people that care about this, but it's more like, I don't care about, if I see something, this is what I see and this is what it is, and we'll keep describing something till we know more about the thing. But I don't care about much about origins or metaphysics or the origin of things at a different level of reality. So I just wonder what your thoughts are about that particular part. So the people that don't like to talk about those spheres of reality.
Yeah, I think a large part has to do with a lack of telos, right? A lack of like, this is the end goal of a thing. This is something we've actually talked a lot about recently I'm taking a PhD seminar on faith and science.
Oh, wow.
And so you have this Aristotelian worldview, even before Christianity, that has these ideas of like a formal and final cause, right? Like the essence of a thing and what that thing is intended for long term. But around the time of Newton, it all becomes very mechanical, right? It's all very, very descriptive. And we just kind of mention about what is and not what ought to be. And so I think part of that's kind of the separation there of removing what things are for and also what things are. And when I say are, I mean like what is the nature of a thing, not just simply like descriptive. That makes sense.
Yeah. Because I've heard, Chris, in some conversations, I actually did hear Richard Dawkins live in Nashville saying that the question, why is there something rather than nothing, is not a good question. We should stop asking that question because the why questions presuppose agency. And as a scientist, it's very I don't know if it actually makes sense at all to think that way about the world, but what do you think about that? What do you think about the question why in atheism?
Yeah, it's a question that I'm obsessed with, but I don't know that the atheist worldview is all that concerned about. I don't think, at least in the readings that I've done of atheists, that they're really all that concerned about meaning, in as much as like purpose for their life or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
I just I read about a month or two ago a book by Alex Rosenberg,
Mm.
I think that's right, but called The Atheist Guide to Reality.
Hmm.
It's very much worldview, right? I mean, it's talking about like how we interact with and think about reality. But in there, he talks. He has kind of a set of questions, and very much at the beginning, he asks, is there meaning? And he says, not at all. And he says, is there free will? He goes, I think he says, nope, right? Or
Yeah, yeah,
don't bet on it.
yeah.
And so, yeah, if we don't have free will, like if we don't have free agency to make decisions, to change the outcome of our lives in any like significant way, then meaning or purpose doesn't really have a place, because I'm determined to biologically to just do what
Yeah.
I'm supposed to.
We're just a collection of atoms reacting to invisible forces in the universe.
Yeah, and whatever thoughts I have are
Yeah,
afterwards, right?
yeah, definitely. It's something I wanted to mention too. I would like to hear your thoughts. When I was an atheist, Chris, I actually thought that there were certain things in the world that were right and wrong. Then actually, when I became a Christian, didn't change. They didn't change at all. But I've noticed something very interesting. When a Christian friend becomes an atheist, I think there's a tendency to also abandon the morals of it.
Mm,
Meaning, okay, so if Christianity, let's just say something. If Christianity thinks that marriage is important for society and marriage is an important institution, since I've become an atheist, I think I'm kind of being forced to think otherwise. But I wonder why that happens,
yeah.
because a person could be an atheist and maintain Christian values up to one point. So
Yeah.
what do you think about that?
Sure. No, I think that's really interesting, but I think you're right. I think a lot of atheists would have what they would call something like core morality.
Mm,
And many of them would say, these are rooted in survival, or
yeah,
the keeping our race alive and things like that. So taking care of your children, um, taking care of your spouse, even being married for a long time, right?
yeah,
It's better for your kids and things like that. So they might say those things, and all of a sudden you realize that there's a good amount of overlap there. And I
yeah,
think Christianity would say, Romans chapter 1 says the law is written upon our hearts. We all have a sense of the difference between right and wrong. Yeah, I think it's interesting, because I think what you probably see there is someone that's giving up on Christianity or rejecting Christianity, essentially wants to say, I don't want anything to do with this entire worldview. And
yeah,
so while there is overlap there, they just go ahead and reject it wholesale.
yeah.
And so any overlap that might exist, they don't want anything to do with, because it's in connection with Christianity as well.
Yeah, yeah. I've noticed that happens. I follow some secular thinkers that I read about, and sometimes when I see the things that they talk about and they support, they some of them were Christians in the past, and when I see them supporting in terms of morals and social cultural values that are so opposite to Christianity, I sometimes wonder if there's like an invisible force that presses people to actually end up thinking completely opposite to Christianity, because that is actually what I need to do, because I've become an atheist. That wasn't my experience at all. I was an atheist, and when I became a Christian, I actually recognized, oh, this is the reason why I felt this way. Now I understand. So I sometimes when I'm giving out food as an outreach director now at the Donaldson Fellowship, when I'm giving out food for people, this is something that I mention a lot of times. I have given out food as an atheist, and I've given out food as a Christian, and the act itself in both situations felt right.
Mm.
But in one of the occasions, of course, I understand now the foundation for it. And it's not only that you're giving food to a person to appease hunger or thirst, it's actually you're trying to take care of them beyond the thirst and the hunger. You know, there's something else about the value of a person that you want to maintain beyond giving food and water. So it's just a very interesting topic for me. What do you think, Chris? Since you talk to your students about worldview often, do you think that atheism looks similar in, let's say, in India or Mongolia, that atheism looks in Europe or the United States because of the nature of the predominant religions in those parts of the world?
Yeah. You know, I don't know. I don't know that I know enough about atheism in the context of those other countries. I will say, I think much of what we have in our current Western culture is a product of the Enlightenment, and so I think that certainly influences it in one way or another. Not to say that, you know, that's different than those other countries. I don't know, but I do think that there's kind of this this tradition of ideas that's been passed down that's influenced it.
Would you tell us a little bit about the Enlightenment? It is very usually in conversations, and how in the 17th century we moved beyond the gods or God, and now we have a new way to understanding life. Would you tell us a little bit about what happened during the Enlightenment?
Yeah, I mean, you just kind of have this whole upsetting of the apple cart in Western society, and it's I guess it's right after the Reformation, and so things have already been upset a little bit. Right, the Catholic Church has been disrupted with the Protestant Reformation, and so people are going back to the sources. Right, the Latin phrase ad fontes. Right, they're going back to the original sources to try to develop like their thoughts on things and recapture what it means to do things in the original way. And so the Protestant reformers, they go back to the scriptures, right? They go back to the Bible, what it originally said, rather than church tradition, at least the church tradition that they had received. Now, I think that the Enlightenment is trying to go back to kind of this humanistic view of the world, and trying to like start not with some outside authority, but rather start with man himself and work out from there. I can't remember, is it Kant that says something like, this is man's coming of age, right? Pushing off of immaturity. So they kind of viewed it at that time of this, like, this is us becoming, as humankind, becoming adults, right? We're putting off these arbiters of truth, like the church and these conventional ideas, and we're gonna start with man and work from there. And it's in that you see a lot of amazing things happen. I mean, you have like the Industrial Revolution, a little ways after that. But yeah, I mean, if you just start with man and you end with man, it causes you to wonder what might be missing in there. But yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot there. I mean, you had mentioned it briefly, but you have plenty that are mentioning kind of the death of God. Was it Nietzsche, right?
Yeah.
And so people kind of pronouncing that religion or Christianity is dead. It's not dead yet.
Yeah.
It's very much alive. But yeah, kind of this strong division. And I would say this too, right here, that before the Enlightenment, at least in some ways, you have much more of an agreement between different areas of culture. And I would even say between like science and Christianity. And it's after the Enlightenment that you start to see a lot of separation there, a lot of breaking off of different areas.
Yeah, when you were mentioning about the Enlightenment, and the focus was, it seems that it was to bring attention to the human as an origin and fundamental, like a foundation for reality. It starts from the human and it goes upwardly to understand the world, but we don't need any external authority. But the first time I read about the Enlightenment a little bit, Chris, it reminded me a lot about Christianity, and I'll tell you why. It was because the idea of there being an universal value in the world, like we need to awaken the world, we need to make them think in one people, we need to awaken them to the new reality, and this is actually truth, And it is very interesting because that's a very Christian move.
Yeah.
It happened in the first century, which is interesting that we haven't, as far as I know, and I agree, I would agree if someone would say, well, Pedro, you don't know a lot. I agree with you. But as far as I know, I don't know if I have found a movement as strong-willed as Christianity in terms of bringing unity universally under one concept of truth and the value of humanity. So after the letters, after the Gospels and the letters of Paul, there's a historian that he's an agnostic, actually. He wrote a book. I don't remember the name now. I just read, and he's talking about the facts that we're all Christians, whether we want it or not, in the Western civilization. Like, there have been ripples of how incredible the letters of Paul, for example, how incredibly they changed the world after then. These ripples, we were still noticing them when they go in the Enlightenment. Oh, well, let's be all being awakened to this new reality of understanding and all of this. And when you trace back this type of thinking and universal thoughts that needs to be spread out, you go back to the letters of Paul, you go back to the Gospels in history. It's a very interesting way of thinking. Although, of course, my atheist friends, when they're going to be thinking, hearing this, they're going to be saying, yeah, that is not like that at all. But it is very interesting. So,
Yeah.
Chris, what do you think about, when talking about atheism, in your interactions with atheist friends or thinkers? What is the most usual objection that you find in atheists concerning God and specifically the Christian worldview?
It would seem to me, and this is probably personal, I don't know that this is, statistically for everybody, but the problem of evil is pretty high on there. That an all-knowing, all-good God, all-powerful God would allow evil to happen. I think it's probably pretty near the top as far as objections that atheists would have. And then there's to just point out there's been really solid objections from J.L. Mackie and William Rowe and others on the subject, and so it's something that Christians and Christianity as a whole has to engage with.
Mm-hmm. So when an atheist is reflecting upon the concepts of evil, meaning something is happening to me and I'm suffering, that is just it's just happening. We feel it, right? And we talk about evil as a concept, that an all-encompassing concept. What is happening there in with this?
I mean, I would say you're assuming certain things about the world when you assume it about if you're making a statement that there is a thing as evil, and that certain actions and certain things in this world are evil, right? That diseases are evil, but so is the action of like murder or stealing, whatever it might be. I think you're making a big claim about the existence of something that then you have to offer a foundation for that, right? Why is someone being hurt by disease we might call it a natural evil, but why is it an evil at all, right? Or why is me beating somebody up, why is that a moral evil, right? Or an evil at all, right? And so I have to come up with some way in which to explain that. And so I think Christians in some ways have an easier way of explaining the existence of evil. But then we're kind of then we're on the receiving end too, then to explain why does that evil exist, right? Whereas I think an atheist would have a harder time offering a foundation for good and evil. And they certainly do have answers to that. I don't want to say that they don't, but would have a harder time. But yeah.
There's a book written by Sam Harris in which he talks about concepts that is being used a lot in the Christian skeptic conversation, which is well-being
Mm.
And it's interesting because when you ask about well-being, this is just interesting. When you ask atheists about what well-being is, there's not only one definition
Mm.
about it, which is actually starts talking about the nature of, if there's no true good and evil, then yes, okay, you're talking about well-being, but that is a concept that is so malleable. And
Yeah. Yeah.
what do you do with that? So have you heard about this concept, well-being, in the past?
I don't know that I've heard it in like the same framework, but it is
Okay.
interesting that both Christians and atheists would say, we want people to flourish,
Yes.
or we want the best for people, but trying to define what that
Yeah.
is difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, because in conversations, again, when we say this is better, this is worse,
Mhm.
on this is going to lead us here or there, in terms of direction and in terms of adjectives, when it comes to not having a foundation, whether you
Mm.
believe in it or not, if you don't have a direction, then a foundation, any types of directions just seem blind. It's just a constant discovery of
Mhm.
things, and if they work well, they stay. So it's very interesting. So then, Chris, after having this first 40 minutes of conversation, I haven't actually asked you because I wanted to hear your thoughts before, but what do you think about the question itself? Do you think that atheism is a worldview? What do you think?
Yes and no.
Okay, okay.
I think you had mentioned it early on, but the very fact that atheism is built upon, at least in the term itself, right? Atheism, like it's a rejection of theism.
Yeah.
Just that simple belief that no God exists is not a belief in of itself, right? It's a rejection of a belief.
Yes.
Much like agnostic, right? It's agnosis, no knowledge.
Yeah.
So in as much as it's just a rejection of a belief, it's not a worldview.
Mm-hmm.
I think what happens though is, by rejecting the belief, either explicitly or implicitly, I end up taking certain assumptions about the world.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So, I mean, again, I think about Rosenberg's book that I read recently, but he puts a very high view on physics, and physics explanatory power of reality. And so it's not that he's just rejecting a view of the world; he's instead using part of his worldview as something to explain reality.
Mm.
And so whether we do it on purpose or not, I think we end up at some point having assumptions about the world. In some way, that's unavoidable, right? If I
Mm.
choose to do things for one reason or another, I'm making an ethical decision. If I have a belief about what is and what isn't in the world, I'm having metaphysical, ontological. And when I make a claim about what I can know and what I can't know, that's an epistemological assumption. And so, the moment I make those claims, all of a sudden I have a worldview. Now, whether I want to call that an atheist worldview or not, that's
Yeah, yeah.
it might just be the worldview that an atheist has, and maybe that changes slightly from one atheist to another. But yeah, I think the moment you reject things, you all of a sudden have to fill those spots.
Which, Chris, it leads me to think: is it actually possible to live without a worldview, without making any of those statements?
Hmm.
I don't think it is possible. But what do you think about that?
I don't think it's possible to do it consistently.
Yeah.
To say, I'm not going to make any claims whatsoever, and then live my life. All of a sudden, I'm gonna be inconsistent in that.
Yeah. As soon as you go to Publix and get one brand of tomato sauce than the other,
Yeah,
then you need to give some explanation of why you're choosing one over the
that's right.
over the other. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. Something I wanted to mention to you, Chris. Some atheists claim that we are all born atheists.
Hmm.
We're born with a lack of belief in God,
Hmm.
to which I don't think that is true, because we actually are born without knowing that there's a potential belief in God. So I don't think that is true. But have you heard about this, or what's your thoughts about this? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've heard a little bit about it. You also have um, who is it? Is it Descartes that says we're born just like tabula rasa, right? We're
Uh-huh.
a blank slate. And I think some Christians would say you're born with an inclination to know God, not that you do, not that you're born knowing God.
Yeah.
And so there's a whole spectrum of views there. I don't know. I mean, having very young ones right now,
Yeah.
myself, almost 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 6-month-old. And certainly they're growing up in a Christian household, so take that into account. But they have a natural sense of wonder
Mm.
and a propensity to wonder about things beyond what their eyes can see.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I suppose I'd have a hard time reconciling that that we're all born atheists,
Mm-hmm.
and that religion or whatnot is put upon us.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
And then when I have atheists guests in the show, Chris, I always ask this question. I always try to ask it, which is, um, for you, is Christianity something reasonable? Is it a far-fetched idea, or is a complete irrational thought? It's just completely irrational. So I would like to ask you now
Mm.
about atheism. When you read about atheism, not actually the emotional atheism or anti-theism, which is that is more based on emotional arguments, and that
Yeah.
happens with Christianity too, by the way. So no, but when you actually meet a person that says, I actually know why I'm an atheist.
Mm.
These are my arguments, whether you like them or not. I actually believe they're true. So what do you think about atheism at this point in your life? Is it reasonable that a person can come to the conclusion of not believing? Is it a far-fetched ideology, or is it just complete irrationality? I
Yeah.
don't want to actually restrict your
No,
answer. I'm giving you 3. You can give even more. So yeah.
no, I would say it's a fairly reasonable belief, given there's evidences and proofs, and just by way of note here, sometimes we talk about evidences and proofs like they are just they're good by themselves, but we always interpret them, right? Like we
Yeah.
have interpretive frameworks that we use. But yeah, I think it's people have reasons and rational reasons for why they believe that there is no God.
Mhm.
Now, I would say I think that of course, being a believer, I think there are things that they are left not able to reconcile. And so while many of their beliefs are reasonable, I do wonder about how how they would reconcile certain parts of their life, and certain ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned something succinctly, but I liked the way you put it. It's actually this is just my opinion. It's very difficult to be consistent
Mm.
with a worldview where there's no true foundational belief. It is just a day by day. Yeah, it's a living life, as David Hume puts it. Just every day with your 5 senses, you're trying to probe everything, and you say, okay, today this is good,
Mm.
and it has been working for a while. So why shouldn't it be working tomorrow? So I'm going to put all my, I think you say in English, apples or oranges or whatever in the basket, or the eggs. Sorry,
Mm. Yeah.
all the eggs in this basket. But yeah, it's difficult to be consistent, because one of the books that uh, I respect. I mean, it was kind of influential for me was La Pensée from Blaise Pascal, and he's
Mm.
saying something very interesting there, which is just the general idea is, the good philosophy is the one that is not just abstract thinking. It's actually that you can instantiate and put it into practice, right?
Yeah.
So there are parts of, and this is my next question for you, is about a skepticism.
Mm.
Being skeptic by nature is actually not a bad thing, but when it comes to actually being consistent with the way we live our lives, I think it's actually wholly unlivable.
Mm.
So what do you think about the levels of skepticism in atheism?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, just like you said, I think a healthy dose is good. I encourage my students all the time, and I eagerly want them to ask really hard questions. To the is it Socrates that said the unexamined life is not worth
Yeah.
living, and that's probably an overstatement, but I do think we should examine our lives
Yeah.
and to think really deeply and critically about the views that we hold and why we hold them and so on. So, to that extent, I think being skeptical can be good. Now, if everything is under skepticism, and I'm always skeptical about everything, it's hard to ever form like a positive belief about something.
Mhm.
So I think that's a hard balance. Even for the believer, but I would imagine even more so for the atheists, where so much is built or hinging upon this skepticism. But how far do you take that, and at what point do you start trying to build up or construct like a positive view
Yeah.
of the world, rather than kind of this reductionism or kind of critiquing of life? So.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Because when it comes to skepticism, I was there, I was also, this is not possible, this or that, and this doesn't make sense, and this actually cannot make sense at all, even if we try to make sense out of it and all of this. But then this is the parts of the Christian skeptic conversation that it is not emphasized enough from my perspective, Chris, which is, what about the experiential side
Mm.
of things? We talk about theories and arguments. We're also, actually not me, but incredibly intellectual, formal logic, our arguments, I think this, I think that. But then we go to bed, and the 5 seconds before we go to bed and close our eyes, we go, what is this? Where
Yeah.
am I going for 8 hours?
Yeah.
How is it possible I'm going to come back to the same consciousness? What is this? The fact that I'm going to die. And this is the part when talking about God becomes, for me, I've noticed, like, we end up talking about God as a theory, and
Mm.
God is not a theory, but it's a person.
Yeah.
Like, when we talk about these attributes, all knowing, we're talking about attributes as if they were part of a theory, but
Mm.
these are attributes that are part of a personality, and that truly really changes the whole conversation. So how much do you, with your students, for example, Chris, how much do your students press with questions about emotions, experience, and life in conversations about theology and apologetics?
Yeah, man, that's a really good question. I would say, in some ways, a lot of my students end up falling into two opposite ends of the spectrum. Either they're asking questions almost purely from like an emotional, existential standpoint, or it's completely kind of abstract over here.
Mm.
I like to see, kind of like what you're mentioning, more of kind of the middle of where I'm asking these questions, that they're important, thoughtful questions, but they're rooted in kind of this everyday living of the experience that I have, and the existential longings that I have. So yeah, well, we have a decent amount of those conversations during my classes. I teach 3 classes. We call them Christianity, Culture, and Worldview classes.
Mm.
But we talk a lot about that, and so we discuss a range of topics, and try to bring it down to the ground, right? So we can talk in the abstract about
Mm.
frameworks and beliefs,
Yeah.
ideas and facts and proofs and all that, but what does this actually look like day to day? Is it livable? Is it
Yeah.
is it is it true? But is it good? Is it
Yeah.
beautiful? These type of things.
Do you think, Chris, that at the academic level, whether for Christians or non-Christians, for everyone, do you think that the at the academic level thinkers shy away a little bit of the experiential, emotional side of things, which at the same time is just such a that's just a real experience of our lives? Do you think that happens?
I think so. I think there's just a tendency to do that. When you're writing 5, 6, 7,000 word articles, to publish in a journal, you're footnoting and you're all this, and so it's kind of the temptation to do that. Although I'm pleasantly surprised when I read both Christians and non-Christians, that really try to wrestle with like the everyday life, of how does this look, and how do we reconcile these things that actually happen, rather than just kind of this abstract argument. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, Chris, I'm very thankful to spend time with you, and this has been so enriching for me. My last question for you is, where do you think the Christian skeptic, Christian atheist conversation is going to go in light of what is happening in the world nowadays?
That's a really good question. There's maybe this is too obvious, but there's two ways it can go, right? Either we really continue to like polarize ourselves and go in opposite directions, or we start finding some areas of commonality with each other, and start to stress those and talk about those a little bit more. As to which one I think we're headed to. Yeah, I will say this: whether or not this is a future prediction or not, it's interesting to me that both Christians and atheists are people that are being disinvited more and more from areas of kind of free thinking. I'm forgetting who it was. Some of the new atheists was just recent, like I think this past week, was disinvited from a place because something according to like it was going to hurt feelings.
Oh wow.
But you have the same thing with believers as well, and so there's a little bit of a commonality there, right? That neither of these worldviews ideas are gaining a whole lot of traction in these areas of learning. And so there's some commonality that we both want more free speech, right? We want to be able to talk about our ideas, discuss them openly, and to have those conversations.
And what about at the level of the university and colleges?
Oh yeah.
Do you think that is happening, Chris, right now? Conversations open really where people can challenge each other?
I don't think so. Not nearly as much as I think there should be, and that might be different here than it is in other places. Now, I will say, I attend a conservative evangelical seminary for my PhD program, and they have us read like what I would consider some of the best like atheist thinkers on a wide variety of issues, so that we're aware of the other side of the argument. So I think that's encouraging, and but I just hope that that's being done in return as well, and that we're all, no matter of our worldviews, we're all trying to read and understand the other side in a way that's not trying to disparage them, but try to fully understand their perspective.
Yeah, I think the prediction in terms of data and what we read in some statistics is that both Christians and atheists are going to be talking more about Islam than other things in the future. Definitely. Yeah, I think we both are going to be in between quotations. I don't know. I don't want to sound, but I think we're going to partner a little bit to talk about Islam together, because that's, I think, where, at least in Europe, is growing so fast that is going to be an interesting conversation to have. Okay, well, Chris, I'm very thankful for you for your friendship and everything that you do with your students and your family. Thank you very much for spending time with me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you very much for you guys for watching. And as you guys know, in the description of the video, I'll share some links if you guys want to know more about Chris, and also if you want to connect with the show. As always, you can email me at askamondanashville@gmail.com or go directly to the website, askamonda.com. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you, Chris, for being with us today.
Thank you.
Bye.